Hello and welcome to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast, Series 3. Last year, we spoke to SDRs, BDRs, and people earlier on in their sales careers about their journeys, tips, and why people should get into the industry. This year, we'll be speaking with sales and business leaders about their journeys, how they've made their success, and their insights into sales as an industry, especially what needs to be done to change the perception of sales. I'm Lizzie.
I'm Kyle, and still for far too long, people have just been falling into sales. Through this podcast and by having conversations with industry leaders, we're looking to continue to change the perception of sales and make it a career of choice. On today's episode, we're joined by Callum Henderson, Chief Revenue Officer at EngageTech and EngageIQ. Callum first joined the business as a BDE with no experience and in 9 years progressed into a C-level position. In this episode, Callum talks us through his journey, gives some top tips to salespeople and sales leaders, and shares his thoughts on the importance of mental health and well-being in sales, amongst many, many other things. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to this episode of the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast. Today, we are joined by Callum Henderson. Callum, massive thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. I was just saying to you guys, it's been prepped for really well. Appreciate the kind of organisation that you've put into this and what you're doing.
No, not a problem at all. Thanks so much for joining. And to kick things off, it'd be great if you just please introduce yourself and tell the listeners a bit about you and the company that you're currently working with.
So as you've already introduced me, my name's Callum Henderson. I work for a business called EngageTech, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer there. In terms of the kind of problems that EngageTech solve, we help B2B technology companies to better take their products and services to market in a new business sense. So if you've got a sales development team in that space, the kind of typical challenges you might be facing is dial to connect rates, inability to actually connect with the people who you might want to be meeting with, and also like building teams that actually retain and grow and become a talent pipeline for the rest of your sales organization can be quite difficult. And so there's kind of two key ways that we do that. We provide a software, but also services to solve that challenge for the customers that we work with. I've been at the business 9 years last week, actually. And it's been an incredible experience, start to finish. A little bit more about me: recent dad, which has been a great fulfilling experience. Few stressful moments, and yeah, other than that, live in London and have done the majority of my life. So.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the introduction and obviously happy 9-year anniversary and congratulations on being a dad. So great. And thanks so much for that. As you know, then on this series, we're really focused on speaking to people in senior or leadership commercial positions as such. So what we love to do, though, is start right at the beginning. So I guess the big question for you is how and why did you get into sales in the first place?
I did a journalism degree, which I think over time I've come to realize was pretty useful, but at the time of doing it, I suppose I had some questions about if it was worthwhile or not. When I finished that, I had a few free internships that I had to execute for businesses, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed them, but it was a pretty simple decision to go from earning nothing and providing like work for free to moving into a sales role where I was paid solidly on my basic and had an opportunity to earn commission. I suppose the added bit of detail was that I had a friend who worked at EngageTech who I'd been to school with, who just due to my university experience, I was a year behind. And he joined, progressed within the business. I knew he was enjoying it and I'd met a few people socially that I liked. And yes, that made the decision even easier to do it. Funnily enough, I was talking to my mum the other day about stuff that was going on at EngageTech, and she was like, "Oh, well, yeah, it's great that the company's doing well. I thought you were going to be terrible at sales when you took the job at the start." So, yeah, it definitely wasn't necessarily something that was like massively in line with the kind of career path I had envisaged for myself. But like a lot of people, you kind of end up here and give it a crack.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a journey. Actually, interestingly then, why would your mum say that? Why did you think that you would be terrible at sales?
I think because I've always been someone who's quite slow to warm up to new people. I've always been quite introverted in my family environment or with friends. Once I know people, I'm very open and social. But I think probably the stereotypes of sales were why she thought that. Like, I really value kind of like honesty. I really value kind of like being direct and to the point on topics. And yeah, like I think her vision of what a salesperson was, which is maybe one of the reasons why you're doing this in the first place, didn't match up to what she had come to know of me as a person.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's probably, well, that is a massive reason why we are doing this podcast. And I'd love to delve into that a little bit then. Out of interest, though, like, when did you first hear about the industry? Was it your friend working in, or was it something else?
Yeah, I definitely feel like on that recruitment journey when you leave uni, it was floating about a lot of the roles that looked like they were promising a lot in terms of progression. And like yeah, they all seem to revolve around sales. So I suppose that was a little bit of that kind of whet the appetite. And then yeah, I was very fortunate that someone was willing to include me in this. He actually left the business about 6 months ago, and yeah, I did his kind of leaving speech, and like the main thing I could say to him was like, thanks for including me, because when you find something good, not everyone is like, oh yeah, I want to share this with one of my good friends, and yeah, so yeah, I saw some jobs online and then got the invite to interview, and it's kind of a no brainer, really.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, it hasn't gone too bad for you either in terms of your progression and what you've achieved so far. So, and touching then on, I suppose, similar to what your mum was saying about the stereotypes of sales, and that kind of going against maybe what you're like as a person. What was your initial perception then of the sales industry before going into it?
I wouldn't say drastically dissimilar to those stereotypes. If I was to sum it up, it's like gift of the gab would probably be the phrase that like I most looked at and felt fearful, like knowing that I don't have that, and knowing that that's something that like is very alien to me. Was probably the most forefront insecurity about it. I'm sure there were many other things about it that I looked at and feel like, okay, well, communication's key. I feel like I'm quite good at that. I looked at my friend and felt like he's someone that I've spent loads of time with over the years, and there are some similarities between us and some differences, but that that seems like something I could turn my hand to if he's done it. And so yeah, it was probably quite a balanced view once I got into it, but definitely if you'd asked me 2 or 3 years before I went through that interview process, it would have been quite similar to the kind of stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. And because I suppose that stereotype was, slightly against what you believed yourself to be, gift of the gab, and you, as you just mentioned, you don't have that, or so perceived to be.
I don't.
I mean, how nervous were you then, going like into that process, thinking, okay, like one of the big, like my massive stereotype of sales is I need to have the gift of the gab. I don't have that. How did that make you feel as you started up the interview process?
I think I felt good about the fact that I'd been recommended in by someone who was succeeding, so that was disarming. I think for that feeling, if I'm being honest.
Hmm.
And then you meet people in the interview process who seem like they don't either, not in a rude way. They just seem like normal, rounded people, and they talk to you in the interview process about how they started from, having no experience themselves, and also feeling a little bit like this was something new, which I think, definitely in the early years of being at EngageTech, one of the big attractions for me was that they promoted from within, and everyone within the business did the sales development role. And I mean, that's still the case for about 95% of the recruitment that we do. But it certainly gives you a feeling of like, wow, okay, people have joined here without maybe some of the fundamental skills being tapped into yet, and being coached on them. So there's no reason why I wouldn't be able to replicate and grow like others have.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I suppose then now being in the industry for the time that you have been, how has your perception changed?
Yeah, like massively. I think probably one of the best bits of content that I would recommend around it is Salesforce. Salesforce have a short film. It's about an hour and a half long. I think they also like split it down into about eight shorter sections, and it's just a history of sales. So it goes back to like Dale Carnegie talks about snake oil salesmen like back in the day, and then it just kind of progresses through like spin selling, into challenger, and then into like a modern selling world. And there's loads of I think they've got some successful salespeople from Salesforce, but also some other companies as well. And it was just like I thought such a measured view on the disconnect between how many of the fundamental skills you're actually not educated on early in your life. And I think that film probably best represents how I feel about it. So maybe that's a cop-out answer, but also also like hopefully someone watching this could go and watch that and maybe get something a lot more valuable than what I have to say on it by watching it.
Yeah, absolutely. So to all the listeners out there, there's your big that's your big recommendation for today, and we'll definitely delve into, I suppose, sales education and everything that can potentially give us later on the call. Really, then touching, I suppose, finally a little bit more on you. Then, can you remember the first ever sale or meeting that you booked?
Yep, the first 4 meetings that I booked all cancelled before they went ahead. And that's always something that I try and talk to our like newer starters about, which is it's easy to look at anyone in a slightly more senior role and be like, oh, they came in, they smashed it from day one, because I definitely didn't. I think if I go back to something that I said earlier about having like quite a direct style of communication and feeling comfortable like being direct, one thing that I was quite good at when I first started was getting right down to the point of the call with a prospect, which meant it was really comfortable for me to talk about the fact that I'm ringing you up to book a meeting. And what that meant was I was booking a decent amount in the first couple of months. Where I lacked a little bit was a kind of empathy for the other side of the conversation, and my qualification skills weren't great and needed sharpening. And I was asking probably a lot of closed questions in the early days. And what that meant was I was booking a meeting, getting a few yes nos for the qualification rather than delving into proper pains and the reason for meeting. And so I was getting a lot of those meetings were cancelling, which was a good learning curve to go through at the start. So it wasn't a glamorous story, if that was what you're looking for. Like my first meeting, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think we were hoping for your first meeting to be like a big blue chip organization, and it went on to be the biggest deal in EngageTech's history. But I guess that's the reality of it, though, isn't it, as well? That's kind of the real side of sales. And what we'll be keen to do now is to kind of unpack your journey a little bit more. Now we've spoken about the perception, how you felt going into it. And you mentioned at the beginning in your introduction from BDE to CRO in 9 years, very impressive career trajectory. So just, I guess, talk us through that journey to begin with, Callum.
I was going to write a message on our internal Slack channel last week just about what I'd kind of taken from the 9 years, just as hopefully if I could provide a few tidbits of information for people in the business that would help them, then it would have been worthwhile. And I just haven't been able to like put something succinct down. And I'd probably try and look to break down that 9 years into some smaller sections if I was going to try and do that. I think the first one as a sales development rep, I just think it was one of the most enjoyable kind of like periods in my life, because I'm competitive, so I enjoyed that like leaderboard aspect. And then also in a professional sense, I think it's the most carefree you'll ever be. You come in, you've got your number, you're not really reliant on anyone else if you've got the kind of right attitude towards it. If you want to, you can really put the hours in within the framework of a working week, but generally weekends, evenings, like there's no overflow or there wasn't in my experience. So it was such an ability to come in, hit it hard, and then kind of leave work at the door. And definitely a lot of the kind of newer generation of people that work and come through the door at EngageTech, that work-life balance seems to be such an important like part of what they're looking for from an employer. And I do understand that the sales development role can be stressful, but for people who are looking for a work-life balance, I think it's an impeccable job to have, because you can really hit it hard when you want to. When you want to be on, you can be on, and there's good commission to be earned. And when you want to be off, there's no. I didn't experience massive stress overflowing into other roles, and so I look at that as like a really selfish time in my career and in my life. And then you just go to the polar opposite end of the spectrum as an SDR manager. And I think it's such a good, if I was ever to say to anyone within our business, what would be the next job I would advocate for someone taking, it would probably be that. I think it's such a good learning curve to go through to manage and develop graduates or junior salespeople, because you are constructing not just how do you execute effectively in sales conversations, but you're also trying to teach people to be better rounded adults. And that's tough, but also pretty fulfilling if you can do it. And also, I think you have some of your toughest conversations with people in the first like couple of months, whether or not they're going to succeed. In that role, you might be close to like pretty close to hiring and firing conversations as well within a company, and it doesn't really get tougher than those. And I think it can be such a great platform for what potentially comes after that. And I definitely felt like I was the beneficiary of that. I suppose when I first started, probably had responsibility for about 12 people, growing to about 30 over that period, and having that between the ages of like 24 to 26 was, yeah, great. And I'm very, very grateful that I was given that opportunity, because I think it would have been really easy to not, based on my experience and age at that particular time. The next phase I would say is like a step into selling beyond sales development. And again, I feel really blessed that I did that from a perspective of having a really good understanding of how a business works and how teams work, and having a perspective of the persona that I was selling into, because I had been an SDR manager, and I'm now selling into companies who want to make their SDR manager more efficient or want to make their sales development team more effective. I understood the pains. I'd been through them in the last 2 or 3 years, so I could kind of talk that language. And I would advocate for anyone in a sales role, the best thing that you can do is really invest in understanding, walking in the shoes of your customer profile. And if you can do that, a lot of the other things seem to fall into place after that. And yeah, so again, like I think that period was definitely about like moving from managing a large team into managing a smaller team, and having more touch time with fewer people was great, but also managing a team for the first time where I hadn't done that job. So I was managing account execs and account managers, and I'd never sold in a kind of 360 capacity. And again, I would say that was like fulfilling and testing, but also good fun. Probably the best thing that I did in that, and I would again advocate for people, was we lost our top 2 salespeople in the first 5 months of me doing that job. And I wasn't upset about it, because I didn't think that they were a cultural fit for what I was trying to achieve. And it definitely meant that the next 12 months wasn't as good as it could have been if they were there. But I think that the 2 to 3 years that followed, we achieved infinitely more than we could have if they were still in the team. So some short-term pain to get the right culture, I think, is definitely like a big and strong lesson that I took from that. And then if I look at the most recent phase in a like post-COVID world, it's been about like cultivating the best possible employee experience so that we can thrive and grow and go from a 50-person business to a 150-person business. And I think refining my own skills so that I can help people to become specialists in particular areas has been interesting. And I've always just enjoyed being at the kind of forefront of everything net new that we do as a company. So I suppose that's the story in a general sense. But I think the biggest things that I would just try and take away from it is there have definitely been points in that period, in that 9 years, where I've questioned, is this the right company for me? Am I in the right role? And I just think that in probably about 50 to 60% of those situations, I truly invested time in that to try and solve the problem rather than expecting someone else to do it for me. And then in the periods where I couldn't solve it, I then went to our owner, who I've been very fortunate enough to cultivate an amazing relationship with over the last 9 years, and laid out in a very clear way what the problems were, rather than coming at it in a big general sense. Like, can I turn this like big feeling into 2 or 3 smaller things? And given him an opportunity to solve them or show a willingness to solve them. And, I think you learn a lot about a person or a company if if you present those challenges and you see what they do with it, and a lot of people that I kind of see who end up tapping out after a couple of years is they aren't able to solve some of the problems themselves or aren't willing to, and they don't stick around once they've raised the problems to actually see if someone wants to kind of do something about it. And I suppose that kind of patience and willingness to kind of stick around and work through some of the challenges is why I've managed to stick here for 9 years. And I'm also not saying that that's what everyone should do in every situation, but
yeah.
That was a bit of a rant in the end. Maybe went on for about 7 minutes there.
That was. Considering you're direct and to the point, there's a lot there to digest. But no, really, really useful stuff. And a couple of things I'd like to pick up on was one of the first things in that kind of journey. You said about advocating the SDR manager job as something you'd recommend anyone to do. One thing I'd be keen to get your thoughts on is you said that, at the age of 24 to 26, that was the role you were doing, and you go from booking meetings, kind of carefree, you're kind of in control, it's not really reliant on other people, to then getting involved in hiring and firing conversations. It's a big leap when you think about it. So what can people that are wanting to go into that role, what can they do to prepare for that jump, for that leap?
I think the best thing is to get better at listening, get better at asking good open questions and sensible follow-up questions, and being willing to go three or four deep, and really practice like not having to be the first person in a room to talk. I think would be the headline things. And interestingly, they're also the things that help you to be a good salesperson, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like we're maybe dipping into the sales education piece there as well, potentially. So we'll go into a couple more things, then we'll go into that in a bit more detail. So it's a big part of what we're looking to achieve here.
Sure.
Look, certainly don't want to get too personal here, but we spoke about there was a couple of people that were top performers, but weren't too right culturally, and we get that all the time when speaking with sales leaders. Or this person's a top performer, but yeah, what impact are they having on the rest of the team or the rest of the business potentially? So rather than focusing on why they weren't right, what do you think, or even at EngageTech now, what makes the culture that you're looking to cultivate within a sales team?
Yeah, I think it is so important to say that this isn't necessarily me saying that every culture should be like this. There are some like wildly successful businesses that have a very kind of cutthroat sales mentality. They keep hold of their like higher sales performers who focus on high value activity all the time, and that's the way that they want their organizational structure to be. I just don't believe that at EngageTech we've always like kind of looked at it that way. I've always felt like having people who are open communicators, having people that are willing to work through conflict and are kind of willing to come to sensible resolutions is important. I want leaders who care about the progression and development of their team. An example, a lead with a really good account like comes in, is the manager of that team always going to pick up the best ones and pass the not so good ones to their team, or are they going to work with their team on the best ones to try and help the more junior members like grow, develop, and build a confidence? And yeah, I think it's I mean, if I look at some of our values, we've got like team first, ego last is one of the company values, and I think that probably is why I felt like those two individuals didn't necessarily match what we were after. And yeah, like as the company develops, and we've just gone through 160 people, I think the other day. Like I think there is a little bit more space for maybe an account exec who's out for themselves, but they might be one of 15 people in the sales team, so you can kind of like navigate that a little bit better. But when there's 4 of you, and you're going through a global pandemic, and you're not sure if the company's going to survive it, like there's no space for ego. And so, yeah, that's maybe why some of those decisions were quite easy to make.
Yeah. Yeah, I get it. I think you particularly, like you said, during COVID, when things maybe aren't going so well, you need people that you kind of want to get in the trenches with and want to kind of do things as a team and work towards a common goal. So like you said, yeah, it's not necessarily the same for every sales organization, but I think there's a lot of things there that people can look to implement within their cultures for their sales teams. And you spoke about this then, and we talked about your journey, and you stayed at EngageTech for 9 years now, just over 9 years. And there is a lot of debate at the moment around, I guess, staying with a business being better for your career versus actually, is it better to move around? And interestingly, there was an article that Forbes released, it was a few years ago now, and it was titled "The 10 Reasons Why the Most Successful People Change Jobs Often." There was very little evidence in that, some good ideas, but very little evidence. But it is believed that people can achieve a higher salary increase by moving jobs more often as well versus staying. So I guess first of all, what has kept you at EngageTech for 9 years?
Do I like the people that I work with? Do I respect them? Do I want to spend time with them? Do I feel like my salary and commission progresses on a consistent enough basis to match the lifestyle I want to lead? Do I feel like I am given net new responsibilities? Am I challenged? And do I feel like I'm developing my skills? And do I believe in the mission and the challenge that we try and solve for our customers? Underlyingly, do those things combine to mean that I'm happy and healthy? Every time you ask yourself those questions, if the answer is yes, like I don't feel the need to change. If I ask myself those questions and the answer is no, then I'll kind of consider it. If I look at the majority of people that I know, friends, family, acquaintances, they search their whole life to try and get like the answers, like the positive answers that I've had to those questions since the day that I started here. And so, yeah, there's problems. Yeah, things could be better at points, but I think if I weigh everything up, like it's, another 10K right now to risk all of that. Why? I don't get why someone would want to do that. Interestingly, there's I don't remember the exact name of the book, but it's by Ben Ryle, and it's around the pillars of an elite salesperson's career. He talks a lot about the fact that the kind of like top end high earner account execs typically are moving company like every kind of 3 to 4 years to make sure that they stay ahead of new techniques and are always in like emerging industries that are booming, which makes complete sense. I think it's been really difficult for people to resist moving in the last year or so. You've obviously got the Great Resignation. You've got a massive bubble, I think, in terms of the kind of packages that people are being offered. And, I think that bubble will adjust, maybe not burst. And I think there will be some people that regret those moves, but there will also be others who don't. And it will be the best thing that they've ever done, like moving business. I think the thing that I would always encourage people to try not to do is to move on a sideways step just for salary. But I mean, I'm sure there are people that have done that and it's been great. The other thing I would just like to add is it really comes down to the company that you work for. If you feel like you have a good culture and you feel like the problems that you raise or the things that you enjoy are developing and it's being matched and mirrored, then great. But I meet a lot of people who work at terrible companies, and then it makes complete sense to move for a 10K bump if it's been a rubbish experience. So
yeah, exactly. I think it's what you said at the beginning of that answer. There was like the 3 or 4 question checklist. I think that's probably what people should, if they're ever thinking about a move, is answering those 3 or 4 questions rather than I can get 10K here, or I don't think there is a right or wrong. You should stay at company X for however many years, or you should also move every 2, 3, 4 years as well. I think you should just be constantly reviewing that kind of checklist that you said at the beginning.
Absolutely. But I think there needs to be another checklist. Have I given it everything here? Yeah. Am I accountable? Have I done all these things? Because basically, if you move from a good company to a good company, but you've still got a terrible attitude, it's going to be the same outcome.
Yeah. Some people maybe look in the mirror sometimes, potentially.
100%.
Yeah. No, good stuff. And one thing, coming back to the journey then, we kind of spoke about the BD role, the SDR manager role, obviously more recently CRO as well. For people, that's kind of a role that they would will certainly aspire to get to. A day in the life of a BDE, I mean, you can kind of articulate and vision that, can't you? A lot of time on the phone, you've got a target to hit. What does a day in the life of a CRO actually look like?
Yeah, that was one of the questions that I really kind of struggled to answer, and maybe it's a bit of a reflection of how short a time I've actually been in the role. I definitely feel like I'm still trying to kind of find my feet in the position and work out what are the environments that I should be in and what are the environments that I need to take a step away from. I think the term revenue is certainly something that like is maybe marginally a little bit understood. Like my job isn't, or I don't consider someone in a revenue-based role to be like, it's not all about sales. Sales leads to revenue, but revenue is like invoiced and delivered work, whether that's someone subscribing to your software or actually receiving executed services. And so I think it's a lot more rounded, even though there's a sales focus to like operational and like I think ultimately work being delivered. And so how I try and look at the role that I'm in is ultimately, can I make us like 1% better every day as a company? And I think as much as our like sales performance, it's how profitable are we? Do we have the right kind of culture? What's the kind of retention of our employees looking like? What's the experience of our employees like? And what's happening in the market? What are our customers saying? What is the profile of our customers actually experiencing? What are the challenges that we need to adapt to mean that our services, product, software all adapt? And so yeah, like every day is different. I've got my like one-on-one scheduled over the week, which always happen at the same time. But outside of that, it's what's needed, not what I want to do, I think.
Cool. And I think there's some similarities there in kind of a revenue or results driven role. There's still metrics that you're measuring, they're just on a different scale, essentially.
Yeah. 100%. And look, like I said, at the start of this, I think I could give you an answer in 3 years that will be way better than the one that I just gave you, way more detailed. But again, it's just like if I always try and say to people in our company, and I hope anyone else hearing this it's useful for you. Like, I've never met any superhumans in senior roles in companies. People are often still trying to wing it, work it out. There's obviously a degree of skill and training they've been through and experiences that shape how they operate. Most people in these senior positions are willing to work really hard as well and learn and be accountable. But like, I feel the same as probably someone who's 4 months into their account exec role. Like, you're still learning it, and there are moments where you look around and feel like, wow, I got that wrong, or my diary isn't organized in the right way at the moment to execute on what I need to.
Yeah. And I think I got that wrong. I think the key thing there is being aware of when you've got things wrong and being able to having the confidence to acknowledge that as well, and know what your areas for development are. So I really appreciate you kind of going through the journey, Callum, and want to kind of make the transition in a second to just sales education, really, because it's something that we've spoken about before the podcast. But just one more thing, you did a post recently where you said EngageTech are going to make over 10,000, is it, new business meetings this year? I think you said actually 99% of them will come from using the phone as well. But just for any salesperson or sales manager listening to this, the answer could be the same. What can they do to either get their teams or themselves to book more meetings?
I think for us, a structure around cold calling has always been so key to giving people the confidence to continue to do it without maybe a manager guiding them through it. And if you just take the average dial to connect in the industry, you're looking at like somewhere between like 16 to 1 to 20 to 1. And I just see so many people that we work closely with, whether they're customers or partners, someone will make 10 dials, give up, go make a cup of tea. And so it's like, how can you expect to succeed if you're not even making 50% of the dials that would enable you to speak to one person? And there's training, coaching, development, structure, technology that all need to come in to enable a rep to be successful. But yeah, like I think it's like an education about what it actually takes if you do want to book more meetings, to number of inputs versus skill when you are actually in a conversation are the kind of two key variables I think in it.
How important is data in sales performance? You mentioned then about ratios. I've seen a lot of your stuff in the past has been almost quite technical, quite analytical in terms of maybe times of day, better times to connect, double dialing, for example. How important is data to you and EngageTech when it comes to improving meetings booked?
So when you say data, do you mean like contact data, or do you mean like the metrics and analytics that surround the team?
The metrics and the analytics.
Yeah, I think it's key. I've always tried to look at like sales development teams like sports teams. If you turn on any kind of sports channel, there's metrics everywhere. Moneyball, very very interesting. I've not actually read the book. It's on my shelf, but the film's great and fun to watch as well. yeah, like I think there's a lot of to kind of take from that. If I look at one of the bigger challenges around CRMs, it's that like those kind of like fundamental analytics aren't actually that easy for a sales development manager to get hold of. Small plug, but that's one of the things that we're trying to work on within our software tool to try and make that almost like state of the world analytics really simple for someone. But yeah, I mean, if I can work backwards through my funnel as an account exec to work out how many meetings I need, what pipeline I need, that funnel just extends into the sales development team. So I think it's critical.
Cool. I think Moneyball's on Netflix as well. For anyone listening to this, if you do want to watch the film, I'm pretty sure it is. Seen it on there. And on the contact data as well. I know it's a little plug that you gave there, but I think that is also very key. You know, you can make as many calls as you want, but if you're not calling ideally mobile numbers or getting through to the right person, it's kind of redundant, really, isn't it? Or it makes it a lot more difficult anyway.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things about sales development teams that we've experienced in the last couple of years is a lot of organizations are feeling like they need them to catch up, but maybe they don't have the experience or expertise within their own company to really understand what kind of an investment it is to build one and to make sure that that team is enabled once they're in flight. And it's not as simple as just being like, here's the CRM, here's a phone, crack on. You might need to buy 2 or 3 data tools. You need a conversation intelligence tool. You need a phone system. As we've spoken about analytics, you need a full-time manager. You need time every week to coach people. And yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a kind of word of warning to anyone that wants to build a team, right? Like you've got to be ready to do it in the fullest, because it's tough.
Yeah. Cool. And then we alluded to it earlier on, but want to touch on, I guess, sales education, really. And it's something that we've spoken about before. And as you know, the title of this podcast is to change the perception of sales. And the mission or the vision really is that people actively choose to go into sales. It's not something after uni where a friend mentions it or they go on a job board and just see sales jobs and they kind of flood in the job board and the only thing available there. So it's something you've shared with us before, Callum, but what are your thoughts on what can be done from an education perspective to get more people actively choosing to go into sales?
So I think the first thing that I would do if I was ever going to advocate for rolling out like sales skills arriving with people earlier on in their life is like definitely not to call it sales like training, because I think that's still like quite triggering for people. And I think if I look at it much more as like kind of social coaching, like I spoke earlier, like how do conversations actually work for people in terms of the dynamic between speaking and asking questions? What kinds of questions like enable you to really tap into building a relationship with someone? How do you read things like body language? What are different personality types? How do you engage with them based on your personality type? Like, I think all of those things are the starting point for better social interactions. And if you have better social interactions, I think some of the ability to move them in a direction that you want to become a little easier. And I think that those things happening earlier in formal education or offered in a degree, I think are the starting point. And look, to be honest, I'm not an expert on all the different degrees that are out there, so there might be some things that like offer something similar to that already. But that would be my kind of thought process.
Yeah, I think in the US it exists. Over here, I did a business degree, and yeah, there was nothing to do with the ability to influence negotiation. It was all kind of marketing or finance focused. So I think there's still, from speaking to graduates as well, quite a lot of work to be done on incorporating some of the fundamentals of just communication actually into the education system. But what I know you kind of, it's not something all of us are experts in when it comes to teaching classes, but what do you think a lesson or something would look like in a school or in college or in uni if we were to have just a lesson plan on sales education, communication, or some of the things that you've just talked about there?
What a question. I think the first thing the first session would have to be around like active listening and like truly taking in the detail when someone is talking. And then I think the follow up would be to work out how you could pick up on something and ask some questions to get a much better understanding beyond the surface level of what that person is actually thinking, feeling. I think that would definitely be the first like term around those couple of topics, I think.
Yeah. And I think you kind of answered it in the first answer that we gave when we talked about sales education. But one of the things I've been thinking about is, look, it's something we should do, but you probably get a lot of backlash from maybe parents, students, maybe other teachers going, oh, we don't want to teach sales to kids. There's more academic things we can teach them. So how would you convince or even sell to a parent, to a teacher, to a school that these are the skills that they should be teaching kids? Because they might have no plans to go into sales at all. So how would you sell it to them that this is something they would benefit from?
If I look at my own life, in the recent past, I've managed to convince my nan to get an iPhone so that she can be on WhatsApp and can see more photos of what's happening like week to week within the family. And also, unfortunately, my granddad's a little bit unwell, so I've managed to convince them to move from about 45 minutes away from their daughter and son to like basically right next door to my mum. And those are things that my younger sister was like, oh, I've mentioned those things like loads of times. Like, how did you get them to do that? And the reason why I got them to do that is because I understand how to convince someone to do something through the experience that I've picked up. And those are examples that are relevant to me, but I'm sure anyone can look at their personal life and feel like there are things that they would like to not like abuse in terms of convincing someone to do something, but genuinely things that would help their friends, families' lives to be better if they could convince them. And so that's where I would start. I would talk about things outside of I want to transact with you for money, and then talk about how can you help people around you to lead a better life, or a more comfortable life based on being better at these things.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's valuable skills that you can use outside of the workplace and everyday life that you can build on anyway, from what you can gain from sales. Great. And then just before we wrap up, actually, want to talk about something that's really important just because it aligns very much so to changing the perception of sales. And we appreciate that investing in mental health and well-being is something that is a huge focus on at EngageTech. And you said in a post actually a few months ago about the game changed when you became open about your own experiences. Please, if you don't mind, just sharing a little bit more about what you meant by that. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, so I think vulnerability is very important in leadership roles. I hope that I've communicated, even on this conversation, many times, like with a degree of confidence about what's going on, but also moments where I've said, actually, no, I don't feel like I'm an expert here, or I don't know this thing, or I'm right at the start of something. And I certainly felt like being a little bit more open about the fact that I have a therapist that I see. Well, I saw him quite a lot at one point, but about every 8 weeks, and being open with the company about that felt very important for driving a mental health and wellbeing dialogue within the business, but also to enable people to see that, like I said earlier, there's no superhumans. Like there are things that I struggle with, like anyone else would, even though I've got a C-level job title, which, if you actually break it down, is important for people, but doesn't actually like influence actually how happy, healthy I am in a general sense. And so yeah, that felt key. I mean, it was life changing for me to go through therapy. It's been life changing for me to have the right mentors and coaches as well. But it also felt like it was important for other people in the team to feel like maybe they weren't like weak or giving up if they went to seek help or wanted to kind of talk to someone, because maybe at moments they'd felt like I'd been strong when they were feeling down, and then actually for me to reveal that I have a therapist, that's maybe quite key for them. And yeah, I think across the business, leadership have been more vulnerable, and that's been important.
Yeah.
I will, if I could like elaborate a little bit further, I always find it a really like tough line to strike around mental health, because I'm not an expert, firstly, and I wouldn't profess to be. I think that you can have down moments, not necessarily feel up for something, but still like I still think there are times where you have to dig deep, and at the moment, I think there's a it's very cloudy about like what is the right advice to give to someone based on their like personal circumstances. If I look at, for example, we have like mental health and wellbeing days within the company. We have one a quarter at the moment. There are some dialogue that I'm having with our employees about the fact that they're quite nervous about the fact that gas bills are going up this Christmas, life's more expensive. And then they're also the same people who are like, we need these mental health and wellbeing days to like take time off and work less than we used to. And like for me, there's like a disconnect where I look at it and it's like, in those 4 days you could work and earn enough commission to cover the gas bill that you're concerned about, and then maybe that's a different way to reduce the stress on yourself rather than not. Like, and like I said, I'm very proud to work for a business that offers that. Just because your business offers that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing for you to do to take that time off. And so, like I said, it's a really tough balance to strike. I've found, like, between those two things. All the while, me saying like I have a therapist and I hugely value that. Like, and so I could understand why leaders in other businesses are also finding it quite tough if they are, because I don't know what advice to give to people in every situation.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, really appreciate your openness with that. And I think that would definitely help people understanding, as you said, there are no superheroes really. Everyone's human. Everyone's going through things as well. So and obviously, depending on the situation, it can be different for different people. But I appreciate your openness with that. I suppose just
in any company, make sure that like there is a champion in that business in a senior role saying, if you need to talk to someone, please do.
Yeah.
And most people that are against it look past the initial rejection. It's normally through insecurity, fear of opening up and opening Pandora's box, which is why they'd be against it, and have an empathy for someone who's outright rejecting it, I would say.
Sure. No, absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I think it's good. A good point to make. Great. And just, I suppose, then to finally just wrap things up, then a couple of last bits then actually. So, remembering actually just before, back in the pandemic, actually, you were very, very active on LinkedIn with a lot of videos sharing advice and tips to salespeople, and it very much looks like potentially there is a recession on the way. So, I suppose for yourself, then, having successfully navigated the pandemic, doing that, what advice would you give to salespeople as we approach, potentially the next downturn?
What a question that is. I think I would definitely be right now having conversations with your internal team about what is the plan going into the next 6 to 12 months. If the worst case scenario plays out on 2 or 3 things, how will the company like handle that situation? And I think the first thing is just being empowered with information to make the right decisions for you. Anyone under 2 years within a company is like marginally vulnerable just based on like UK contract law. And so if you've moved in the Great Resignation, you could well be last in first out if there is a change there. And I think just an awareness of that is the kind of first step. And then actually kind of selling through like an economic downturn. I think I would just focus on as much skill development as possible. And in between now and the time that changes, and it might not be in the next 6 to 12 months, I think it's always about cultivating the best possible relationships with ultimate decision makers rather than influencers. If I look at the majority of people that we sold to across the last pandemic, when like really in that first like 3 months lockdown and maybe the 3 months after, it was normally like business owners, founders that were like ultimately in the conversation and championing it. And I think people who are influencers or lower in terms of like maybe owning a budget, I just don't think they feel as confident like signing off on things, or they have their budgets frozen in economic downturns. And so just go as high as you can in terms of building your relationships.
Perfect. All right, amazing. A couple bits of key advice there. And then finally, we asked LinkedIn actually for some suggestions on what they wanted to ask guests on the podcast. And this one came from Ifan at Fishing Tackle, which is, what is the most effective training methods to develop a sales team?
I've always tried to help someone to come to their own answers. And I think certainly recording live sales conversations and watching back with someone is important. And I think getting the individual who's in seat on the sales recording that you're watching to like, maybe the prospect's talking, just as they're about to finish, pause. What's the question right now? Like objectively sat back here, you would be asking, rather than saying this is what I would ask now. And I think there's such a subtle difference to get someone to review their own performance rather than chipping in. It doesn't mean you can't have an input if you feel like what their suggestion is in that situation isn't perfect, but people tend to follow their own advice and their own input way more than someone else's. And if they say, oh yeah, I should have done that, it's a lot more likely they will follow through on that rather than being told by someone. We don't typically like to be kind of preached at. And yeah, I just feel like that's a really good way to coach and develop teams. And then the one better than that, than a manager coaching the team, is peer-to-peer coaching as well.
Perfect. Right, amazing. So peer-to-peer coaching and then letting people come up with, I suppose, their own solutions first. Amazing. Well, Callum, that is all we have time for today. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Callum.
Thank you so much for listening to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast. Please subscribe and follow for more. If you like this content, also please check out This Is Prime on all our social media channels, and also Kyle Gallagher and Lizzie Formisano on LinkedIn. See you next time.